Summer is when many beginner flower farmers feel so burnt out, or they feel like that they're so behind that the season is over. But the truth is, the decisions that you make right now will determine whether you have a successful fall or spend the rest of the winter contemplating whether or not you should continue doing this. I've made these mistakes. I've seen other beginner flower farmers make these mistakes, and some of them are ones that I haven't heard frequently talked about on YouTube. So in this video, we're going to discuss the top 5 common mistakes that I see beginner flower farmers make and what you can do right now to course correct, because there is still so much time left. And so that brings me to mistake number 1, thinking that the season is over while it's really actually still young. Let me break this down for you. If you are watching this video sometime in late June, early July, and you're in zone 4, you've got about 90 days left before the first frost. Zone 5, you've got about 105 days left. If you're in zone 6, you've got 120 days left before mid-October, which is your expected first frost. If you're in zone 7 like me, our first frost is usually in later October, and we've got 135 days left. For those of you in zone 8 and above, you've got way more time. You've got something like 150 days and beyond. So you've got months of your season left. And in my first year of vegetable gardening, I thought that I had completely missed the boat on the season because it was July 4th and I hadn't really gotten a lot of my tomatoes started. And it just felt like I was so behind. And that was before I realized that there's more to gardening than just tomatoes and peppers. There's so many other things that you can grow, and that is so much so also in the flower farming world. There are some things where it might be too late for you to get started on, like dahlias, but there are plenty of other things that will have more than sufficient amount of time to grow. And here's the other thing. I know that this time of year it's demotivating. In fact, right now it's 95 degrees outside, which is why I'm standing in the shade, but it's really humid. It's obviously too hot to work outside. So I know many flower farmers who have to wake up at 5 a.m. just to fit in a few hours of the work that they need to get done before those intense temperatures hit. But the good news is that obviously this doesn't last forever. It's usually a couple of months. And after those couple of months pass, we get into much cooler weather, which is the best time for flower farming, because a lot of people think that spring is the time when there is high demand for flowers. But in reality, spring and fall are both high demand flowers. And some flower farmers, depending on where you live, might actually find fall flowers to be even more popular and in high demand than the springtime. So if you're feeling like that the season hasn't currently lived up to your expectations, I would encourage you to take some time to think about how you can use summer to set yourself up for a very profitable fall. In fact, last year, which was my 3rd year flower farming, I purposely took the month of July off, which meant that I didn't do a ton of selling, but I spent a lot of that time getting the ground prepped, putting plugs in and seeds in to make sure that I would have a more successful late summer and fall season. And I had a bounty for fall because of all the groundwork that I put in July. That dovetails perfectly into my next mistake, which is that I don't see a lot of flower farmers taking the month of July or the midpoint of your summer to really think about what is going to be 60 days out, 75 days out, 90 days out for you to harvest. A lot of beginner flower farmers get super excited about planting all their seeds in the late winter and early spring, and they put everything into the ground, everything blooms, and then all of a sudden there's this big gap. So you might be experiencing that gap right now, but again, that gap doesn't have to continue. This time of year, we've got longer day length. In fact, we just had summer solstice earlier this week, which is the longest day of the year. And now we are progressing towards shorter days, but there's still gonna be about 60 days where we have long days. Long days means longer lengths of sunlight, which helps facilitate growth in flowers. We also tend to have more intense heat this time of year, which accelerates things. Even sunflowers that are supposedly day length neutral, they have a 60 days to maturity on their back of the seed packet, I find that typically I can get from putting the seed into the ground to a bloom head in around 50 days. I think the fastest I ever got it was 48 days. So it goes to show you how everything accelerates during this time of year. To me, July is one of the more critical planting months, especially if you're looking to have consistent blooms through the fall. Now, there are people who might be a little bit wary of putting plugs in July. I'm here to tell you that you can definitely do it. You obviously need to be a little bit more conscious about what you're putting into the ground. Things that love the heat are best direct seeded this time of year. They can also be put in as plugs. You obviously need to water them pretty well. But in order to put in plugs in July, you need to have planned ahead a couple of weeks earlier in order to have ordered those plugs. So I did that. I have about 6 trays coming in July, another 3 trays coming in August, and that will last me from late summer all the way into fall, and I hope even beyond my first frost. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about what crops we should be thinking about for the fall that can be put in this time of year. That is where I see mistake number 3, people not fully understanding what types of crops excel in the fall. If you think about it from a plant biology point of view, this type of crop needs to be able to survive in this heat as a seedling, but then also put on growth and then start initiating flowers when the day lengths start getting shorter, right? Because as we go towards fall, the days are going to get shorter, which means that these crops need to either be day length neutral or be triggered by shorter photoperiod day lengths. There are many flowers that fit into this category. For example, celosia, that tends to be more day length neutral, obviously tolerates the heat really well. Zinnias, I find that I can have successions starting from July 4th, going all the way into mid-August because they have a really fast days to maturity. Things like snapdragons are also another great example because there are 4 groups of snapdragons. There are certain varieties that are workhorses that I find work no matter when you plant them, like the Potomac or Rocket series. But if you really want to maximize the fall type of planting, you want to go more towards group 2 and group 1 types of plants, which do get triggered for flowering during shorter day lengths. Now, of course, they do have to be able to battle the heat as seedlings, but I find that if you put shade cloth over them as seedlings and you keep them well watered, they are more than sufficient to be able to survive these types of temperatures. Some other plants that need to go in earlier than later, so it might be a little bit late to start if you are in a zone like mine right now, but if you're in zone 8 or above, I think you still have a chance. Things like asters typically need to get put into the ground a little bit earlier because they do need to bulk up, and those shorter day lengths initiate the flowers. So if they don't bulk up by the time you get to the short day lengths, you're not going to have a ton of usable stems. And this was the mistake that I made in year 1. I had put in aster plugs in mid-July. That was just way too late. Last year, I pushed a little bit earlier to early July, still too late. So this year, I started my own from seed. They got into the ground in early June, and basically right now they're putting on growth. But another really good example is chrysanthemums, so heirloom mums. Typically people are getting them into the ground sometime in May and June. They're pinching by July 4th, hoping that they will get really bushy because that's what they do. They put on a lot of bushy growth during the longer days and the hot summer months, and then they start flowering once we start getting to fewer day length hours. Same thing with dahlias. So again, you might have missed the boat if you are in a zone like mine, 7 or below, but if you're above, there's still definitely time to plant crops like that. Now, I do want to say that I personally love fall as a time of experiments. Last year, I had successfully grown fall stock, which is not something that I've seen a ton of people do, but it's following this mentality that there are some crops that excel in the spring that might actually do better for us in the fall, because in the fall, we tend to have longer days that are cooler versus in the spring when it tends to be cool for only a short period of time before we jump quickly into summer temperatures. Now, these crops do need to be a little bit more day length neutral or have those short photo day periods as that trigger to initiate flowers. So a couple of other experiments I'm doing this year also include ranunculus. I know that other bigger farms have done this in the Northeast and been successful with it. So this year I plan on doing that. And if you're interested in seeing what I'm putting into the ground over the next 6 weeks, I do have a Patreon post that details all of of the crops that I'm growing, and I actually break them down by risk, so their chance of success. There are some sure bets like celosia. I talk about the different types that I'm going to grow, but there are some other crops that I'm growing that I think should be a sure bet. And then there are some more risky ones that I have never grown in the fall, but it'll be good to experiment with. So if you want to see what I'm doing there, head on over to my Patreon. It's $5 a month, and every single week I release a new article or a Patreon exclusive video talking about flower farming stuff, including strategy, business, and things like crop planning. There is something really important that I didn't get a chance to say here, which is that nothing is forever. And this is specifically in the context of pests and even weeds. So a lot of people, especially in their beginner years, feel really defeated when the thrips start taking over, the Japanese beetles are eating their flowers, and God knows what is being thrown in their way that they didn't expect. And after a few years under your belt, you're going to learn to expect these. If not, you're going to learn how to work with them and make peace with the fact that when it's cold, you're going to have aphids. And after those aphids, those thrips are going to come in when the temperature gets warmer. And then the Japanese beetles are going to arrive around the July 4th timeframe. And after that, the aphids are going to come back in the fall. And there's going to be a bunch of other pests in the middle. But nature will work itself out, especially if you are mindful in how you're farming, creating an ecosystem where it can take care of itself. But even if you're not doing it, just know that pests typically don't live throughout the entire season, and nothing is forever. All right, so let's start getting into more business strategy, marketing related mistakes that I see. Mistake number 4 is not having a plan for premium blooms start to come in. I myself have around 600 Lisianthus plants in the ground right now. In year 1, I started with around 200. In year 2, it was somewhere around like 300, and this year I doubled that to 600. I know many beginners who have taken on the challenge of growing Lisianthus, which isn't terribly hard if you're growing by plug, but is obviously a little bit more tough if you're trying to germinate from seed. This is a crop that is long days to maturity. It's pretty expensive to grow, whether from seed, because you're spending so much time on it. The seed is inherently also more expensive, and the plugs themselves cost around 80 cents each, including shipping. So this is a crop that takes a lot of labor costs and startup costs to grow, and you don't want to be stuck with a bunch of them with no plan on how to offload them. So Lisianthus is one example, but there are other examples out there, even like dahlias. If you spent $20 for a tuber, you want to recoup the cost of that tuber beyond just the tuber multiplying, because you can't guarantee you're going to store it properly. You want to make sure that you can sell enough of those stems at that deserved premium price that you should be able to fetch for it and be able to pay back all the costs that you incurred. So what does this look like? To me, this looks like teasing up that you're gonna have this special crops 4 to 6 weeks in advance. You've got AI resources out there that you can use. Your prompt to ChatGPT could be, I am growing Lisianthus and I want to write a Facebook post telling my customers about how special these are. What would you write in that post? I would even give it an example of a prior post that you wrote on Facebook so that you can train it to understand your voice. So that way, when it writes the post, it comes off as more authentic. One of the things that people don't realize about AI is that it's an iterative process, meaning that you don't just ask the AI platform a question once and it gives you an answer and you put it into whatever you're using it, like a social media post. It's a conversation, and you should be having at least like 2 to 3 iterations before you settle on the final format. So that's just one way of using AI to help with social media in this case. You can ask AI, give me 5 different ways I can talk about Lisianthus throughout the next 4 weeks so that I can get my customers hyped up about what's to come. If you don't have Lisianthus, talk about other specialty crops you're growing like zinnias, even funky celosia. Most people have never seen the different types of celosia that exist. There's so many different types of celosia, and yes, they are at the local nursery, but at the end of the day, most people don't really think about them in bouquet. Don't just rely on one platform to communicate, because we know that these days people may not see the posts that you put on Facebook or on Instagram. Have you been collecting email addresses? I think it's a really great practice to send out one email a month to anyone who has ever bought from you if you collected their email address, and just let them know what's going on the farm. A lot of beginners think that email is only used when you have to sell something. That's completely false. Email should be used as a communication vehicle for your customers to get them brought onto the journey of what you're doing, as well as give them a bit of the behind the scenes. So you can also ask ChatGPT or whatever AI platform you're using to say, I want to write an email to customers who have bought from me before. I want to let them know what's happening on the farm. Right now, I'm doing a lot of maintenance work, a lot of weeding, but I expect to have Lysianthus, specialty zinnias, the Queen Lime series, and I want to really make this exciting and hype it up. How can I write this post in such a way? Only write 3 paragraphs, make it in 6th grade reading language, and give a call to action, and make sure at the end of it, it highlights that people can expect these blooms to be ready in 4 weeks, and I'll give more information when that comes out. So right then and there, if you are not a great writer, you have a really good basis to start off with, and again, iterate back and forth with that AI platform. That brings us to the final mistake, number 5, which is discounting through the summer slump. And let's recognize the elephant in the room. The summer slump is real. It is a time when a lot of our regulars are going on vacation. People have just like events that they're going to, so they're not always at home. And it's just one of those times of year when flower sales tend to go down. I think also because people have more access to flowers. Think about all the veggie farmers that are bringing flowers to the farmers market for only $10. And there are a few things I have to say about this. One is that if you are someone who knows that this is going to happen because you flower farmed before, pull back on your volume. That's what a lot of us do. But the second thing is that you don't want to discount your blooms. I would rather give away more blooms to customers that I really value, or to teachers, to nurses, to people in the community, than to discount blooms. Especially if you are in your first year of flower farming, you don't have an established customer base. I firmly believe the concept now that how you set the pricing on your products is going to attract the type of customer that is going to come and buy that product. In other words, if you are growing really great flowers that are specialty and deserve to be priced at a premium, but you're selling it for a much cheaper price, like $10 a bouquet, even $15 a bouquet, you are going to be inherently attracting people who are not willing to pay beyond a bargain. Or the analogy is they're the types of people who go into a thrift store and end up with a Gucci dress for $25 without realizing the real value that they have in their hands. So those type of people don't make good customers. They typically complain more. They're the first ones to email you if one stem starts drooping. So those are not the type of customers that you have. And the way that you price, especially in the beginning, is going to attract those type of customers. And I will say that in year 1, I did use Facebook Marketplace. I found that when I priced them really cheap, I had a high volume of customers come in, but they never came back when I priced higher in year 2. So in year 2 and beyond, I always made sure that I kept my prices a little bit higher. Are there times when I discount? Yes, but it's very intentional. It's not because I'm desperate last minute to move stems. So I'll give you a tangible example. I have a lot of perennialized Oriental trumpet lilies. Are really big, they're flashy, they put on a great show, but they're also highly fragrant. And not everyone loves highly fragrant lilies. In fact, I myself am starting to develop a migraine around fragrant lilies. So these are the types of lilies where, unless if I have a really cultivated following who loves those fragrant lilies, which I do have some customers that do, but I have so many stems that my priority is to just get them out the door, because I don't have something like a walk-in cooler. I have a regular refrigerator, and because of the way these bloom heads are shaped, it's really not ideal for me to store them in the fridge. I find that I have a lot of buds that bump off. So anyway, what I plan on doing, which I did last year, is I will post onto Facebook Marketplace one straight bunch, which is about 3 stems, because there's so many buds, will sell for $15. If you buy 3 bunches, you can get it for $30. So I'm still making a high profit because these are perennialized, and I am trying to move a high quantity very quickly. And I know that I am attracting a customer base who kind of sits around this time of year waiting for that deal and will never come back to me for other products. That is something that I only offer once a year because it makes sense for me from a profitability perspective. It would make 0 sense for me to offer that type of deal for something like Lisianthus blooms, where that is totally not profitable because of the amount of cost that I spent in labor to grow them, as well as how much I've paid per plug to get them into the ground. So it begs the question, if you don't want to discount, what can you do? I think this is a really great time for those people who are a little bit more shy, perhaps less confident, to really push yourself out of your comfort zone. Go talk to a local business. Talk to them about the potential of having something like a pop-up bouquet bar. Even if you only have straight stems of sunflowers or Lisianthus, you can make an event out of that with a local business. Businesses also experience this summer slump. It happens in the retail sector too. So many businesses are very eager to partner this time of year because it also helps draw in traffic from customers that normally come in and even completely new customers. If you don't know where to start, I have a video up here that talks soup to nuts around how you can go about hosting a bouquet bar. And I find that these are really great one-time events if you need cash flow and also if you just need to move stems. There are some of you who are like, should I start a flower subscription? I'm not sure. This is a great time to start. Summer flowers are coming and I'm doing a very small mini subscription. It's only going to be 3 bouquets every other week. And that's how you start getting the word out and start forcing yourself to better understand, hey, am I crop planting properly? Am I going to have enough blooms? If I don't, do I have another local grower who I can rely on? All of these things that make you uncomfortable are ultimately going to make you a better flower farmer and a better business owner. And I think that it's really important to start as early as possible, practicing that muscle of getting uncomfortable and going beyond your comfort zone. Another idea is to offer something like DIY buckets. Typically, people offer DIY buckets for brides that are looking to create their own flower arrangements for weddings or special occasions like showers, but you can also market it in a way that's, hey, are you having brunch with friends? Do you have an activity that you're looking to do, but you don't know what? Consider making your own flower arrangements. Buy a bucket from me, which can make anywhere from 4 to 5 mason jar arrangements. They're going to contain a bunch of these specialty flowers, but also say it's going to be grower's choice. So it's going to be seasonal and you can't really pick the flowers, but that's what's fun about having these local flowers is that you don't necessarily know what to anticipate, but they're all going to be beautiful. And we're going to guarantee that you're going to have a really fun time working with them. And they're going to be flowers that you can't really find anywhere else at the grocery store. And make an event with your girlfriends or whatever event it is. Just put it out there on social media, let people know that you're offering this, and you might even get a few bites. Typically, when we have a summer slump, it's because we're relying on the same customers to have the same type of purchasing patterns. So if you're someone like me who is not necessarily a beginner and has an established base, this is perhaps a time when you want to think about expanding your reach to beyond your normal customers. And I've done a bit of talking with my friend Jordan, who is in her year 3, and she definitely pulls back on her summer too. I do also, but there's a part of me that wants to challenge myself to see, can I attract additional people beyond my normal crowd? Because if I can, then I can mitigate the summer slump to a point. So there you have it. These are the 5 most common mistakes I see beginner flower farmers make. And even sometimes I fall victim to these mistakes. I'm always challenging myself in terms of how can I reduce the summer slump. Now, me pulling back in July in selling is also partially due to the fact that I have a full-time job. It is really hard for me to harvest within the certain windows because I have to go to the office on certain days. So I don't want to commit to selling more flowers than what I can. But I also know that I have more flowers in the field than the current sales outlets that I have to move them. So it's a challenge for me to make sure sure that I don't waste any stems out in the back, and I find it a fun challenge. If there's any takeaway you should have, it's that fall flowers can be just as profitable as spring flowers. So if you haven't had a good season to date, think about how you can still turn your season around and make it a really great fall. And if you've been having a great season, there's nothing wrong with saying you want to pull back, but there's also nothing wrong with saying, I want to continue to do what I've been doing and see if I can make this the best year that I can by maximizing my fall. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And this might be an interesting video for you, especially as you're thinking about what crops to put into the ground from a square foot yield perspective.